And welcome to Real Invest Webcast episode 007. This is Joseph Ola. I'm a realtor here in Southern Ontario, but specifically in the area, in Niagara area. I cover the entire Southern Ontario, Niagara, Hamilton, Toronto, Kitchener, Waterloo, London area. And I'm glad to bring you another episode 007 of Real Invest Webcast. Here we look to bring you the chronicles of real estate investors, how they're doing it, and how you can do the same. We also like to engage professionals in the field that can make sure that your journey as a real estate investor is successful. And that's what we have going on here today. So if today is your first time of joining the Real Invest webcast, please make sure to like the video and share it on whatever platform you're watching on. And if you're watching on YouTube, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so you're notified of subsequent episodes. Welcome once again. I'm excited to have you all here, and we have a very exciting guest with us today. I'm so excited to have her on the show today because she will be taking us through some legal essentials of real estate investing. So you're in for a treat. Her name is Olohirere Musa. I call her Olo. I've known her now probably about 7-8 years, and it's been impressive to see her trajectory career wise. So welcome to the show, Olo. It's really great to have you. Could you please introduce yourself to the house?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Musa, and I'm a real estate lawyer in Toronto. I practice at a firm in Toronto, and my practice spans all areas of real estate. So, residential, commercial, investments, principal residence, buying, selling, refinancing, leasing, etc. And I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to share knowledge and also hopefully learn from the questions that are presented today.
That's awesome. It's exciting to. This is the first time I'm having a lawyer on the show, so it's really great to have you. And I'm trusting that many of our viewers and people who will be watching subsequently will be learning a lot. Having said that, again, we do have a lawyer on the show, but you cannot, if you're a viewer checking us out right now or checking later, we have to put a disclaimer out there that anything you learn on this show is not for you to take and run with and execute on your business. You're supposed to still reach out to your own lawyer for your specific situation so that you get legal advice accordingly. And of course, you're welcome to reach out to our guest Olu today for the retainership, and she will be able to guide you appropriately. So all that you receive here today are for your entertainment and general awareness. But if you require a legal counsel, please make sure to reach out to our guest today, and she will be willing to attend to you accordingly. All right. But do you have anything to add to that, Olo?
Yeah, no, just yes, this is legal information only, not legal advice. Everybody's situation is unique. And so please make sure that you don't take what we're saying today as legal advice to your specific situation. Please reach out to your legal representation.
All right. So let's jump right into the exciting stuff then. So one of the hot topics within investors, among investors, has to do with how to potentially, structure yourself so that you're protected, maybe explore some tax shelters, or potentially just protect yourself against the litigation. So with regards to how to structure your asset, especially if you're looking to grow a large portfolio, what are the various ways or entities that one could explore in terms of how to structure your business?
Okay, so if you want to own real estate, there are various ways to hold, title to your land or title to your properties. So you can hold real estate in your personal name, which is a common one. Everybody just goes, you sign an agreement in your personal name. You can hold real estate through a corporation. So you set up a corporation or you have a corporation that you already use, and then you put your real estate in your corporation's name. And you can hold real estate through a partnership as well. So a general partnership or a limited partnership can go on title for real estate.
Mhm.
The Going back to the corporation idea, you can hold real estate through a corporation, either like the corporation owning the property, or the corporation acts as a trustee for you or for other shareholders or other partners. So you can also do that with individuals, and people do that commonly when they enter into joint ventures. they have one person or one corporation that they assign as a trustee. And
Mm-hmm.
what that means is that that person or corporation owns the property in trust for your beneficial interest. So let's say I team up with Joseph to buy property. We can set up ABC Inc. And ABC Inc. will hold that property in trust, meaning that ABC Inc. does not own the property. It's acting as our agent while we maintain our beneficial interests in the property. So those are various ways. And your agent can be an individual as well. If for some reason I want to be the one on title because I don't think I have that many assets or I don't think I have that many creditors, I can go on title and Joseph will be like a silent partner or silent investor in the background. And I will hold, let's say it's 50-50, I would hold that, even though I'm the only one showing on title, I will hold, we have an agreement showing I hold the property 50% in my interest and 50% in Joseph's, just for an example.
So in that case, uh, the actual ownership on paper would on title shows your name,
Hmm.
but then there's a different legal document that
Yes.
indicates that the ownership's actually
Yeah,
50-50.
exactly.
Okay, all right. So yeah, that's a way to think about it. So because a lot of people are trying to problem solve issues of mortgages and titles, credits, and things like that. So this is a very creative way for you to still leverage whoever has whatever thing going for them. For example, if the person on title is not the person with the down payment, so you have this document describing that both of you own 50-50, but the person on title is the person whose credit is viable, for example, to secure the mortgage, right?
Right.
Okay. With regards to, I guess, the corporation versus just having the title in the name of an individual, what would be the benefit of one against the other?
Okay. So people put property in corporations' names because of limited liability. What that means is that the corporation is the owner, therefore you don't get personally sued or personally attacked if something goes wrong. With the
Hmm.
property, it's the corporation that's sued, and therefore your assets are personally protected, as opposed to putting your all your assets on the line for this
Hmm.
investment. The downside to that, though, is that, especially in Ontario, if you're owning property in your corporation's name, I'm not an accountant, but this is what I have been informed that you're taxed at the highest tax bracket of 50.17%, I think. If you
Hmm.
own, just if your investment strategy is to hold property and rent it to tenants, you're taxed at a higher tax bracket, is what my understanding is. Obviously, please consult with your accountant, but that's my understanding. Unless you can show that your corporation is running a business, and my understanding, again, from just general knowledge, is that to run a business, I think you have to employ at least 5 employees. So then you get a lower tax. I think it's about 12 to 15%. How
Hmm.
if you're just on your own holding your property in a corporation's name and you can't show that it's a business, it's just a passive investment, you get
Hmm.
taxed higher. So there are pros and cons. If you do hold property in your personal name, then you're exposing that property. It's one of your assets in the event that you get sued. Even if you get sued for something very unrelated, because it is one of your assets, that investment property is then available to your creditors in
Right.
the event that you are sued. So those are really the benefits between one and the other. Um, Personal name, you might have tax advantages depending on how many properties you're owning and how much your properties are making. But if you go in the corporate name, you have limited liability
Hmm.
generally.
Right. So I mean, I've actually seen situations where um, a person owns a business and they also own the real estate that the business uses, and they
Mm,
have the business on one corporation and then
mm,
the real estate on in another corporation. And that's because the business could be in trouble, but then they don't have to, they don't have to, the creditors don't have to garnish the entire real
exactly.
estate investment alongside the business. So
Exactly.
that makes sense. With the tax, I'm learning something new today. You need to have about 5 employees. That way, you're running a business rather than just an investment, which
That's what
is
I've read. Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah. And on that note as well, and again, on a disclaimer note, it's important that everybody please make sure to consult a real estate, an accountant for all your accounting clarifications. It's one thing also that we promote a lot on this show in that try your best not to cut corners in this. We're talking about the most expensive assets ever,
mhm,
period. In that case, you don't want to cut corners. You don't want to play games. Use professionals when professionals are needed. People get in trouble a lot because they're trying to cut corners. You need lawyers. You need accountants to make sure that things are structured properly and to make sure that you don't get into a litigious situation, or just to make sure that you're protected in general.
mhm.
The whether you make it or break your business in this field lies so much in your alliances with other professionals. So please, let's take that to heart. Again, back to that disclaimer: everybody make sure to consult your lawyer or your accountant for legal or accounting advice. Back to, we're talking about legal entities, and in the case where um, I'm trying to understand how it works with regards to decision making on the property, if it's under a corporation and then the investors are trustees. So if I guess one person will still have to be delegated as a maybe a director, so to speak, in the corporation that takes decisions, or how does that work?
So if you're going to do that, you definitely need an agreement, especially if it's more than one investor.
Hmm.
If it's one person just putting a corporation on and putting the property in the corporation's name, that person would typically be the director of the corporation anyway,
Right.
and there will be no questions. However, if you have more than one person, then you would need an agreement identifying who makes the decisions, what percentage of votes or control is needed for decision making.
Mhm.
People will typically get shares in the corporation
Right.
and will vote those shares, or will have this agreement just outline who can, when decisions can be made.
Okay. And then if we go back to partnerships, which we've kind of touched on, where um, I guess in the case where a separate document is drafted with regards to how ownerships are versus the title, does that same document kind of outline some of things like this, or how does that work?
Yeah, so if it's best to just get a comprehensive. People usually do it through joint venture agreements
Mm-hmm.
because you're when you invest with other people, it tends to be a joint venture. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily partners in the firm or siblings, or even if it's siblings, it's still a joint venture. You're coming together with other people to
Yeah.
for this particular purpose. So you would have a comprehensive joint venture agreement that will identify whether it's a trust, if that's applicable, and how decision making is done. So many things to identify in a joint venture agreement. You want to know that how who's contributing what, how profits and losses are distributed,
Mm-hmm.
who's responsible for the management and operations, who's responsible for decision making. At what point do you have to ask for everyone's unanimous consent for certain decisions, or
Mm-hmm.
you outline different things in your joint venture agreement, and it's very important if you're going to hold property with other people to get one in place.
You all see why you need a lawyer, right? There's no way you're just gonna sit down and cook all this all by yourself. You do need a lawyer, so don't joke around at all. Make sure you reach out to Ola here. She knows what she's talking about. Um, in the case of you know sometimes people again trying to do things and maybe save a pen here or there, what are the common errors that you've seen or mistakes you've seen people run into in their real estate deals, and yeah, let's start with those. What are the major challenges you've seen people run into with
With
problems or errors? Yeah.
major challenge number one is people would not get agreements in place, or they will not get comprehensive agreements in place. They'll do like a one-page pen on
Mhm.
paper agreement, and then they'll sign it or maybe not sign it, and then things happen later down the line and we're debating what the intention was. I know that when we when we enter into partnerships or ventures with other people, we're very trusting of them. The relationship is good. Nobody expects anything to go down. You only would partner up with people that you think are trustworthy. So that makes sense. However, it's very important to negotiate an agreement at the beginning, right at the onset, when trust is still high, when everybody is still cooperating. And it's not necessarily because you don't trust the people down the line. It also helps you to outline intentions. So you'll be surprised when you start to discuss certain things that nobody had thought of, how people differ. You know, it just helps you to clarify what expectations are, because sometimes what you think expectations are not what they are. So mistake number one is not getting agreements in place. You should always get an agreement in place, especially when you're dealing with more than one person. Another mistake that I see is people don't do their due diligence. So they're very quick to, they see a property, they do the financials, and they're like, yes, this is good to go. But it's very important to do your legal due diligence as well. Especially if you want to change the use of the property, if you're buying a single family residence and you want to convert it into a rental, you want to make sure that rentals are allowed in that area. Or if you want to convert it to Airbnb, you want to make sure that Airbnbs are allowed in that area, or a daycare is allowed in that area. Whatever use you want to do, don't be so quick to just buy property and then later find out that you can't use it for what you wanted to use it for. Another mistake is not consulting your accountants, like we've talked about today. There are unintended tax consequences all the time. And so it's important to get your professionals involved as soon as possible, because what you think, you've drafted that's in your best interest might not be in your best interest. So that's another one. Another big one that I see is financial misrepresentation. And so we talked about it. Sometimes you want to get property, and then one person is going on title, and then you have all these silent partners. When you have a lawyer, and let's say you're going with a Schedule A bank, CIEC, RBC, BMO, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
your lawyer typically represents you and the Schedule A bank, depending on the value of the property you're buying. Most properties under a couple of million, the bank would use the same lawyer as the buyer. Your lawyer has to disclose all information in their possession to the bank, and the same way that they have to disclose everything they receive from the bank to the client. So it's usually a joint retainer. So what happens is that people go and they lie to the bank. They tell them that they're the only ones on site. They're the only ones in the deal period. Down payment is a gift from their parents or whatever. Meanwhile, it is from other partners. And then you come and disclose that to your lawyer. Your lawyer is then in a conflict of interest situation, because the lawyer definitely has to release that information to the bank. So
Mm-hmm.
financial misrepresentation is one big issue as well. It's a mistake that I
Right.
see, where
Mm-hmm.
people think that they can just say whatever to the bank and then be honest with their lawyer and expect their lawyer to hide it. I mean, your lawyer can hide that information if they're not asking for the bank, which is the case when they're doing private lending deals. Private lenders typically have their own separate lawyers, so we have no obligations to them. But if it's a situation where you're asking for the bank as well, we have to disclose all relevant information. So be honest is my advice, so that you
Mm-hmm.
don't get into a situation where your deal falls apart at the last minute. And then another one is going firm on your APS. So I know, like back in late last year, early this year, when the market was just going bonkers, everybody was entering into firm deals. People just wanted to get a house, so they would waive conditions and they would deal with the consequences later. And unfortunately, with interest rates going up at this time, a lot of houses are coming back at lower values than what they were bought for. After the appraisals come back, they're at lower values, but people are already locked into firm deals. So one of the mistakes is people not understanding that if you enter into a firm transaction, you have to close. There are very limited exceptions to that. So if you enter into a firm deal, you don't put any conditions, not conditional on you obtaining financing approval, not conditional on you obtaining an inspection, and then you find something out that's not that devastating to the property before you close, you still have to close. Even if the bank says, oh, we're valuing your property at $200,000 less, that's not really the seller's problem. You still have to close. You have to find that $200,000 from somewhere, or risk being sued and losing your deposit. So I would say those are some of the mistakes I've seen.
Well, yeah, I all I can say is everybody make sure you go rewatch all of that because there are just so many nuggets in there. If you're just joining us, this is Real Invest Webcast, and this is episode 007, and we're discussing the legal essentials for real estate investors. My guest here is Olo Musa, and I've known her for probably about 6 or 7 years, and glad that she's doing a great work, and she will be ready to serve you if you are in need of any legal services regarding real estate. I myself am a real estate agent in Southern Ontario. Here I reside in Niagara, but I serve Niagara, Hamilton, GTA, Greater London area as well. Welcome to the show. If you do have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comment section. And as regards the topic of today's episodes, we're discussing legal essentials. So if you are in need of specific legal advice, please make sure to consult your lawyer. Same thing with your accounting and tax needs as well. Reach out to your accountant. Nothing we discuss here constitutes a legal or accounting advice. So please make sure to reach out. And again, we have a lawyer on the show that you could also reach out to later on. Welcome. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And we were just talking about common mistakes that people make on the deals, and a bit blown apart sometimes when I hear sometimes that this still happen. I guess people are still doing deals based on a handshake. No agreement in place, or even if they have something documented, it's not signed. That's yeah, that's quite surprising. But and also it's not really surprising, just because again a lot of people just don't necessarily think that anything's going to go wrong. Everybody gets into the agreement in good faith, right? So nobody's really everybody's dreaming of riding into the sunset. Nobody's dreaming that the the random wild card would ever come. They don't think that the deal is going to throw a curveball. There are so many things that could happen between getting into a deal and the exit strategy that was intended. But one of the things that Olo just mentioned now is that even the exit strategy needs to be discussed, because some people just get in it together, but people have a divergent approach about what they think it's going to take to get out of the deal. So it's really, really important that as you're getting into it, everybody's on the same page as to how to get out. And that one exit strategy also doesn't always pan out, right?
Right.
It doesn't always pan out. So then what's the second option? Who gets to make a decision? Which is something I've seen a lot of people struggle with, because everybody just jumps into it, and then at the end of the day, one person wants to sell, one person wants to stay, and it becomes a mess, right? So the other one that surprised me is people, well, again, all of these things, you kind of know that it happens, but it's still jarring that people want to go that way when people want to misrepresent, and they think that they can just hide behind the lawyer and everything will be good. Well, a lawyer is telling you that that's really not a good approach. Don't do that. Don't go live first and then come to the lawyer for the rescue. Um, and I've seen in many cases of second mortgages, refinancing as well, that it's the same lawyer. I mean, that's brokering the deal. So in that case, the lawyer has no choice but to disclose. So, honesty is the best policy, was what a teacher of mine in elementary school taught us. Honesty is just keep your hands plain and simple. Not to say that you have to divulge information, you don't have to divulge, but at the same time, you don't want to be crooked in your deals.
Right.
Right. All right. So those are, yeah, I think if we ended the show right here, I think there's been a lot of things that could be taken away. I hope you all are capturing all of that. But another thing I wanted us to talk about is foreign ownership, because that's another buzz thing that the late changes or the government regulations to sort of, I guess, slow down the market brought to everybody's attention. Because yes, Canada seems to be a very good place for foreign investors to come, and because of that, we saw a huge demand, which contributed to the spike that we had in the market. And that's not the only factor, but it's just one of the many reasons why the market kind of took off. So, what's the situation right now? What are you hearing with regards to foreign buyers?
So before the government passed its budget this year, there was not necessarily a ban on foreign ownership. You just had to, in Ontario,
Hmm.
I think 2 weeks before the budget came out, Ontario had just increased the foreign ownership tax. So it's called the non-resident speculation tax. And they had just increased it from 15% to 20%, which meant that if you were a foreign buyer, you had to pay a 20% tax just for being a foreign buyer. So imagine if you were buying a property for $1 million, you would have to pay $200,000 in tax just because you're a foreign buyer. The budget came out for the federal government, and now they banned temporarily for 2 years
Hmm.
foreign ownership. So at this point, it's not, foreign ownership is not necessarily an option anymore. On like you can't even do it, even if you wanted to pay 200% of the purchase price, we can't do it because they're trying to bring down the housing market, or they were. So yeah, that's the states right now.
In situations where I think I've seen people wanting to kind of partner with a resident and trying to see if it's doable that way. What do you think about that?
So it depends on what the legislation says. To be fair, I haven't reviewed the legislation in detail because it's just so new and just haven't had that situation come across
Hmm.
my desk yet. But I know that when the non-resident speculation tax for Ontario was the only legislation that was out there, even if you partnered with a foreign resident, they already took care of all those loopholes because obviously they knew there's so many people here who have children going to school here or who have, brothers and sisters living here that want to do that. So I'll have to review the legislation to see what it says. But my guess is that they've taken care of those loopholes the way Ontario already did for their own tax.
Right, right. Okay. So, and like you said, right before the ban, there was already a hike in the taxes, right, from 15 to
Right.
20.
Right.
So that makes it a bit tough for people from outside. Obviously, that's even after the ban is lifted. That means you're still coming up with about 20% of taxes. Yeah, real estate is a like I always say, it's a time game, right? The wave just rises with time. So if the purchase is a long term, number one, like I said, you can buy until 2 years, but even after that, if you want to purchase, you have to play the long game for you to yield the potential returns on investments. Um, the I guess the next question that we should go to is something that I've been a lot of investors, especially people with larger portfolio, are talking more and more about, estate planning as well. So that's an area that, generally people don't want to talk about, but sometimes these are the realities of life that one really needs to, face and deal with. So, what's your take? There are some, I guess, places around the world where it's assumed that once someone passes away, everything they own just goes directly to the family members, and there's no questions asked. We're in Ontario, Canada. What does that look like for someone who doesn't really have their will in place? Like, what does it look like? How what's the implication of that?
Right. Okay. So I'm going to start off by saying everybody should have a will. Everybody, if you're watching today and you don't have a will, please get a will in place. If you happen to pass away and things happen, and you have no will, it's just more difficult for your loved ones and family members to deal with your property, and then you end up paying,
Mm.
you know, pay a lot of taxes when you die. You'll be surprised at the number of taxes you pay in death. You pay capital gains tax on any, property that you have to sell. Then you pay probate tax, which can be substantial. And then you
Wow.
pay income tax in the year that you pass. So it's like three taxes that you're paying.
Wow.
Or well, two, but anyways, you do pay taxes. If you pass away without a will and you own property, then somebody in your family has to apply to court expenses. You have to hire a lawyer, apply to court, and get a certificate of appointment of a state trustee without a will. It's a mouthful. So it's a certificate of appointment of a state trustee without a will. And that person basically has to prove to the court that you passed away, you had no will, and they're the next, in closest person to you in family relationship or in familial ties. So they're your spouse, they're your children, and then they have authority to deal with your estate. The reason for this is when you pass away, we need someone that we need to see who has authority to deal with your assets. If you have a will, it's very easy. You name the person, you choose the person in your will. If you don't have a will, whoever, it could be that brother that you don't talk to anymore, or that stepchild that you don't like, whoever, can show close ties and can prove to the court that they have the ties to you, I should say would could apply for a certificate of appointment and deal with your estate in a way that you actually would not have wanted them to. So if you own investment property with other people, ideally your agreement with those people will deal with what happens to your portion of the investment when you pass away. And ideally it would say, in accordance with your will. If you don't have a will, then you're opening yourself up to anybody just doing whatever they think that they can show is reasonable with your estate. So please have a will.
Hmm. There you have it. It's important to get that done. As uncomfortable as the conversation may be to some people, I think it's something. It's a wise decision just so that you put your loved ones in a good position. If they're grieving, you don't then want them to have this conundrum as part of things they have to deal with. And then one of the major things that I think will be a factor there too will be the time it now takes to resolve all this. It just
Mhm.
becomes a very long process. I had a client that um, had his wife pass away, and it took years for things to be resolved. Like took literally like 3 4 years, just because it's nobody expected that a young lady, with an infant will pass away, but it did happen. And you know her family came out of the woodworks and claiming ties and all of that, and it was, yeah. But again, a young couple, right? It's just nobody wants to think about that at that stage in their life, newly wedded and all of that, but it does happen. So let's take heed to that advice. On a similar note, say someone signs an agreement of purchase and sale, and it's maybe a few weeks to closing, and the person is deceased. What happens to the other party, or what happens in that case regarding that agreement?
So that's a little more tricky. Your agreement of purchase and sale, it's not, you don't have an interest in the property specifically. You have an interest in your agreement. So
Hmm.
you have this agreement of purchase and sale,
Hmm.
and you've signed it, and now you've passed away. You can't force the seller can't then force the estate to go on title.
Hmm.
Like the person is deceased. Your agreement of purchase and sale is not necessarily property that can be
Hmm.
distributed in accordance with your will. So in that situation, then the survivor or the other person would complete the transaction.
Right. So the transaction eventually gets completed by the survivor.
Yes, if you're the sole person on title, then there's just no deal because you
Oh,
can't force your estate to close. You know,
ah,
yeah.
interesting. Okay. We have some questions come up in here. Um, One question is by Mr. Raoul. It says, right now, uh, what's better between Airbnb and investment property versus rental property? So I guess we can use that, I guess, to segue into some conversations that we're having before regarding investment properties. Let me phrase it this way. What are the constraints legally that investment properties have versus Airbnb properties?
Right. Okay. So that's a lot of people are buying investment property to use as short-term rentals. I'm just going to call them short-term rentals, because it's more profitable. Constraints that exist right now, I would say, are licensing. A lot of municipalities have started licensing short-term rentals. For example, in Toronto, you can only use your principal residence as Airbnb. So you can only use rent out a room in your principal residence or a section of your principal residence. You
Mhm.
can't rent out a place that you don't live in. Even if you have a basement apartment and it's a separate basement apartment, like it's a separate unit, it's self-contained, you can't rent it out on Airbnb as a separate unit unless you also inhabit some part of that basement apartment. So that's for Toronto. I was reading recently that Hamilton is trying to start something similar, and some other places might, start trying those similar things. So people are cracking down on short-term rentals because there have been a lot of complaints about partying, about having different strangers coming to the property, like at all times of the night. So a lot of neighbors don't like Airbnbs. So it depends. You have to check the legislation for whichever area you are thinking of,
Mhm.
and see if there are any licensing requirements and any restrictions. Versus long-term rental properties have fewer restrictions. However, they are regulated by the Residential Tenancies Act, which is a tenants protection legislation.
Yeah.
It protects tenants a lot. So
Mm.
if you're going into the rental business and you're going to do long-term rentals, you should be aware that there are only very limited situations in which you can kick out your tenant. If your tenant has defaulted on your lease, they're not paying their rent, they're not keeping the place clean, you have to follow specific steps to get them out. And even then, you can't call the police to get them out. You have to go through the landlord and tenant board to have them evicted. Can tell you now, the landlord and tenant board is backed up by months. So I hear a lot of situations of tenants that are just living rent free in properties because they you have to go to the landlord and tenant board to get them out. The landlord and tenant board can't hear your case for another couple of months, and there's really nothing you can do but just wait. So in the meantime, they'll live rent free, and maybe later down the line they will agree to pay you when you go before the board. But for now, they're living rent free. So those are the restrictions. You're either, you can do the Airbnb situation and just watch out for the rules and regulations, and then, or you can do the long term rental, and then just be aware that you are subject to the Residential Tenancies Act.
Okay. The other, I guess, part of the question was around taxes. Again, our disclaimer stands regarding taxes. Speak to your accountant. But do you have any clues of how things play out regarding how remitting taxes work for a rental property versus an
Airbnb.
Airbnb? Yep.
I think it would depend on whether the Airbnb is categorized as a business. So I know that long-term rental properties are investments, and I mentioned earlier, it depends if you hold them through a corporation, they could have higher rates. Airbnbs, I believe you're supposed to charge HST on those, and I guess that would make them like business income. But
Mhm.
again, I would leave that to your accountant to speak about.
Yep, thank you very much for those. Yes, it's important that you do a bit of a digging. And talking of, due diligence, these are some of the things that we highlighted when we're talking about the common errors, right? That people run into uh, when they do their business, maybe cutting corners or just trying to, get into the deal as fast as possible. So we can talk a bit more about that. With regards to other investment vehicles, like maybe investing in pre-construction, what are the things that you think people need to, pay attention to, when it comes to those kind of investments?
Yeah. So pre-construction, for those who are not aware, is when you buy a property that hasn't been built. It So you enter into an agreement of purchase and sale. The property is not yet ready. It will be ready in 4 years, 3 years, but you're locking it down for now. And yeah, you wait it out. Some of the things to be aware of when you buy pre-construction are: number one, every new build property is subject to HST. So you have to pay HST on the purchase. However, what most builders do is that the purchase price they quote you is including HST, but less a rebate. So everybody gets well, Okay. Most people qualify for a rebate in Ontario on pre construction properties. Sorry, not everybody. Just most people, if you meet certain criteria, one of which is that you're going to live in the property as your principal residence, then you'll get a rebate of up to $24,000 on the HST portion of the purchase price. However, if you're not going to live in the property as your principal residence, then you don't get that rebate. So the price that has been quoted has already taken that rebate into account. So let's say the price plus HST would have been $624,000 when you calculate it. Um, the builder would quote your purchase price as $600,000 because they just assume that you qualify for the rebate.
Mm-hmm.
That's their default position. If you don't qualify for that rebate, you have to budget that extra $24,000 on closing. So that's one thing that investors need to know. Another thing is, I mean, you can apply, you might qualify for another kind of rebate, but you have to pay that $24,000 on closing and then
Mm-hmm.
apply directly for whatever other kind of rebates that you might qualify for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another thing to be aware of with pre-construction properties is that their closing costs are a lot. The builders typically, they're big builders, so they have the advantage of they give you a standard agreement and they send you off. You can try to negotiate some things, but most of their cost stays and so stay. So what they do is they pass on a lot of their costs to you. So in addition to that 24,000, they might pass on the fees they were charged for development levies by the
Mm-hmm.
city or the municipality. You can try to get it capped, but the caps are usually like 7,500 or $10,000. So it's still an additional
Yeah.
7,500. They
Mm.
pass on all their registration fees, anything they can pass on to the buyer, they
Yeah.
pass it on. So those are things to be aware of. And the biggest thing I always tell people when they buy pre-construction properties is that it might never be completed. Builders go bankrupt. Builders abandon projects because it's no longer financially viable. So you've been waiting 3 years for this property. It might never be built, and your only recourse will be to get your deposit back. And sorry about that. Like that's basically it. There is Tarion. I mean, you can try to sue them, but generally your recourse is to get your deposits back. Just one more thing. When people buy pre-con, some of them buy them with the hopes that they can assign them. That's because when you buy something today, by 2 years' time, the builder will probably be selling it for a higher amount because properties in the area have appreciated. One thing to know with assignment deals is that you need the consent. Most of them, you need the consent of the builder to assign, and they might never give you consent, especially if the deal is not selling the way they want. They don't want you to compete with them. So if you have a buyer that's willing to buy your interest in the agreement, they would just rather sell to that buyer directly than give you the right to assign. So my advice to people is not to go in to assignment deals with the hope that with the like not to buy property with the hope that they assign because you might never be able to assign or you might not find anybody that would be willing to buy your property. So those are
Yeah.
just some considerations.
Absolutely. There you go with the lowdown. So if you're going into pre-construction deals, what I found lately is that most builders would even let you know right off the bat that there's no reassignment allowed, right? I see in most contracts that are going to allow it, they would put me even be upfront and tell you that there's a reassignment clause, although it will still be contingent upon their approval, right? Even when the clause is there, would still require their consent, right? But these days, most of them are just outrightly telling you it's not allowed. So the lesson or the takeaway is that when you're going for a pre-construction deal, you look into reassign. Maybe it will be better for you to just ensure that you will be able to close if it comes down to it, because
Yeah.
it's likely, especially these days where builders too are trying to maximize the situation with the market, uh, I guess, retarding a little bit. So they don't want you in competition with them, like Olo just said. So that's something to keep in mind. Um, We've talked about the short-term rentals. By the way, we're winding down to the end of the program here. If you joined us in the middle of the show, it's a Real Invest Webcast, episode 007. We chronicle the journey of real estate investors. We bring real estate professionals on the show to help us make sure that we are on the straight and narrow, and we're maximizing our opportunities to succeed as investors. Our guest today is Olo. She's a real estate lawyer in the Greater Toronto area. And like we've disclaimed so many times on the show, all that you hear here does not constitute a legal advice or an accounting advice. Make sure to reach out to your accountant to be sure that you are completely covered. If you are also looking to retain a lawyer, feel free to reach out to Olo here as well. And at the end of the show, she'll be letting us know how best you could reach out to her. We've talked about a whole lot, so we'll just wrap things up on some other notes of considerations, legal considerations with regards to uh, some investment vehicles. We've just talked about pre-construction, but let's get back to short-term rentals. We talked about the different constraints in I guess we've covered that as well, right? Different constraints with different cities. I know that in Niagara Falls, there's a specific zoning for a strip that they want designated to that because obviously Niagara Falls is big on tourism, so zoning was created just for tourism, for Airbnb basically. And Toronto has rules that we've talked about. The one I guess we haven't discussed is condos. So let's wrap up on that note. What are the constraints that we need to keep in mind when it comes to investing in condominiums?
Okay, sure. I just wanted to mention one more thing with short-term rentals before I move on.
Sure.
We want to make sure that zoning allows for short-term rentals. So you've mentioned, Niagara Falls has a strip for short-term rentals, but there are some places where you're not allowed to do short-term rentals. And that brings me to condos as well. There are some condos, if you decide to buy a condo as an investment property, some condos do not allow short-term rentals, period. It's part of the condo rules. And that just brings us to the general topic of condo rules. When you buy condos, you have to understand that they have their own specific rules that the condo corporation can create and are binding on all unit owners. So a condo is basically a tall, doesn't have to be a tall building, a multiple unit building. It can be townhouses, it can be a tall apartment building in which there's a condo corporation that governs the common areas, but each unit is individually owned by different people. And each condo has its own rules and it has its own laws, some of which could prohibit pets. So if you're buying property and it's in a condo and it says no pets allowed, that's something you have to pass on to any tenants or anybody that's going to be staying at that property. It has to be part of your lease that no pets are allowed because that's part of the condo's rules. Some of them prohibit smoking indoors or smoking, I should say. Nobody allows you to smoke anywhere indoors. So that's also something that you have to let people know. Um, Another big thing is the status certificates for condos. So each condo has a status certificate which outlines the status of the condo, whether it's been paid, whether there are liens on the condo, because every month everybody's supposed to pay a condo fee for the general maintenance of the condo. If you
Hmm.
don't pay your fee, then you get liened, or a lien is registered against your property. So your status certificate could be a big deal if you're trying to get financing to purchase. Your lawyer has to order a status certificate, and if they see that there are arrears of liens or that your condo is being sued, like there are some condos downtown always getting sued for different things, either for slips and falls or they are suing somebody. This
Mm.
would be issues for your financing. Your bank could decide to pull out because it's too risky for them. Because if your condo is in so much litigation, it increases the condo costs, which will increase
Right.
your condo fees, and the bank might just not want to get involved. So condos have their own unique considerations because your investment is subject to rules that are set by other people,
Hmm.
as opposed to non-condos or freehold properties where you can do whatever you want subject to the general municipal rules. Condos have their own specific rules which can affect you. And then last thing for condos is if you try to buy a condo property to flip, let's say you're buying an older property and you want to renovate and sell it as a unit, you need the condo board's approval for any major structural renovations. So again, just know that you're when you're buying a condo, you have rules that you have to follow that are unique to that condo building as well.
Hmm. Wow. Yes, that's a whole lot to think about, and it's important to again do your due diligence before you jump into a deal, assuming that you'll be able to use a property for the particular purpose. For example, we just talked about short-term rentals. A condo corporation may outright just deny you the right to do that, right? Because they have that in their bylaws. Um, I guess in general too, the intent is another thing. Maybe you could talk about part of doing your due diligence about using a property for a particular purpose. We've talked about Airbnb a lot, but there are many other purposes, for example, like businesses, daycares that can be really picky with regards to what kind of property. There's maybe group homes. What do you see? What would you say about that?
Yeah, so if you want, you can't just assume that your property can be used for, especially if you're changing the use. You can't just assume that your property can be used for whatever you want to do. Even if the person right there that you're buying from uses that property as a daycare, for example, they might be
Right,
doing it in contravention of the bylaw. So you have to do your own due diligence to make sure that your property is zoned for the use that you want to use it for. Because if you want to convert the use, you want to make sure that your property is zoned for that use. Some people buy properties, let's say you want to buy it to use it as a junkyard, for example. That's very like there's a lot of environmental contamination that comes with
right.
junkyards.
Hmm.
So they will only allow certain areas to be used as junkyards. And you have to just make sure that you do your due diligence. Well, that's your lawyer's job to do a zoning search or a building search. If you want to renovate the property, you want to make sure that there are no outstanding building permits or no outstanding work orders on the property that you have to close before you can then start your own, renovations or your own use. So there's a lot of due diligence that needs to be done.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Olo, for all of that. It's been a very wonderful show today. I trust that all of you picked one or two things that would help you on your real estate investing journey or home ownership dream if you're a first time person starting out. I do this particularly to ensure that a lot of people who are wondering, I still had a client. Um, Meet me yesterday because they wanted to get into the market and they just lost and they don't know exactly how to get things going. But that's why we do this show to kind of get you started, give you the valuable information that you need to number one embolden you to know that you could make things happen, and number two to put you on the right track, because there are so many ways to do it wrong, but there's help. There are professionals like Olo, who's an accountant. There are professionals like myself. I'm a real estate agent. There are accountants and mortgage brokers and people who are dedicated to your success that you just need to align yourself with. So thanks a lot for coming on the show today, Olo. It's
No
been a pleasure having you. Could you just let our audience know where they could reach you at?
Sure. So just correction, you said I was an accountant. I'm a lawyer.
Pardon me.
I'm a real estate lawyer, and
Yeah.
you can reach me at the best way to reach me is by email, and my email is I don't know if there's a chat I could type it into, but my email is at friedmans.ca, which is spelled FRIEDMANS.ca. Or you could just Google me, and I think my information pops up if you do. And then you can contact me through, my firm's website or through email is best actually.
Awesome. Thanks once again for coming on the show. It's really been a pleasure having you. And like I said to you all, if you do need legal counsel regarding your real estate portfolio, or you're about to start out, actually, sometimes it's actually the best time for you to reach out so that you start out the right way. So please make sure to reach out to Olo regarding how you should kick off. If you have friends that you're looking to come together to get something going, this is the time to reach out to a real estate lawyer like Olo to make sure that things start out on a right note. On this note, I'd like to wrap up the show. It's been awesome time once again. Thanks everybody for joining the show. And if you do have questions even during the week, I'm monitoring the field all week long. So make sure to drop the questions. Another announcement that I'd like to put out there today is that um, I will be transitioning the show to 6 p.m. in the evening. I put out a poll and I tried to reach out to a few people to get the feedback on when they would like to, then when they'll be able to join the show live. And it seems like a lot more people are available to join the show in the evening. So we're likely going to be going live around 7 p.m. in the evening. So that'll be 7 p.m. to 8 Eastern time, 8 p.m. Eastern time on Mondays. Again, I will give it another week to make that call, or maybe a few days. If if your preference is a different time, you could throw it out there, put it in the comment section, and I'll see if that works out. But on this note, I'd like to wrap it up. Thank God for a wonderful show today. Thank God for you showing up, and I wish you all the best. I wish you all the success in your real estate investment journey. Please make sure to reach out to me if you have any questions. God bless you and have a wonderful week.